Hey Sugar Snaps, welcome to the Textile Indie YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name's Brittany, welcome in. If you're an old friend, welcome back. I'm glad to have you. I am starting a 3-part series on knitting a beanie hat, and I'm going to go over in the first video how to get started, how to cast on, and start the ribbing of the hat. In video 2, I'll go over knitting the body of the hat and the pattern, and then in video 3, we'll go over decreasing to create the top of the hat, and then take it off the needles and finish it off. If you're new to knitting, check the description below. I have a series of videos I did on the basic techniques in knitting. For this project, you're going to need the first 4 videos from that series to be able to knit this hat. For this knit hat video or project, you're going to be using double pointed knitting needles. I have links in the description below for the materials that we'll be using for this project, so be sure to check that as well as the corresponding blog post that goes along with this series. And without further ado, let's get started. The yarn I'm going to use for this project is the Big Twist Reverb. This I got at Joann's Crafts. It's an acrylic yarn and it has a fun color kind of combination, so it's going to be fun to knit up and see the pattern of the color come out as I knit. And in combination with that yarn, which is a little bit bulkier, I'm going to use a 5mm or US 8 knitting needle, and I'm using 4 double pointed knitting needles. I'll also have a pair of scissors and a yarn needle to weave the ends of the yarn into the hat once it's done. If you're new to knitting and you want something that's a little bit simpler to start as a knitting project, you can use my washcloth knitting video. I have the link in the description below, and I'll go over how to make this cute little washcloth. You can make sets of these in all different colors for makeup wipes or dishcloths or shower cloths. They have a number of uses. They knit up really soft and nice from the Sugar and Cream Lily cotton yarn. With your tools and your yarn in hand, let's get set up to work on this knit hat. My favorite cast on is the long tail cast on, so you need a long tail and you're going to put your slip knot into that tail. For 70 stitches, I'm going to do about a 1.5 arms length long tail, make my slip knot, and then attach this onto my knitting needle. And we're going to be loading up 3 double pointed knitting needles, so divide those 70 stitches between the 3 knitting needles. I'm going to do 25 on 2 needles and 20 on the 3rd needle. So start by casting on 25 to your first needle, and again, I'm doing the long tail cast on. You can do any cast on you like. Check the description below for a video tutorial on all the different cast ons that you have the option of using. So now I have 25 stitches loaded onto this knitting needle. I'm going to do the same 25 stitches on a second double pointed knitting needle. To do that with the long tail cast on, I'm going to take the new needle, let this first needle hang, put it behind this first needle, grab just like I normally would grab the stitch, trying to get that first needle out of the way. And as I attach this new needle, I want the space between the stitch from the first needle to the next needle, I want that space to be as tight as possible, as if I wasn't transitioning to a new needle, because you don't want any gaps in your edge of your knitting. So I've loaded that. I'm going to do 25 onto this knitting needle. Here's 25 on that one, and you can see this connection here between the 2 needles is pretty small, so there isn't much space between the 2, which will mean that as I knit this in the round, it will be nice and tight. So now I'm going to attach in my 3rd knitting needle, doing the same thing, catching a stitch and trying to get the space between the 2 knitting needles as close as possible by pulling on the yarn here as I do so. And then this knitting needle I'm going to load with 20 stitches to end up with a total of 70 stitches. And then the excess tail that I have here, I'm going to go from the tail, wrap this around my fingers till I get close to the needle, and then use the little bit of the tail here to wrap through and create a little bundle. This will be my end to weave into the body of the hat once I've finished. So that little bundle will indicate that this is not the end that I want to be knitting from. It's just a good visual cue. So the knit hat that I'm going to be sharing today is a pretty basic pattern, so if you're a beginner knitter, it's a good one to start out with. In the process of knitting this hat, you'll be practicing casting on the knit stitch, purl stitch, knitting in the round, knitting on double pointed needles, decreasing, and binding off. So there's a lot of great techniques to practice while working on this hat project. Now I have these stitches cast on. I've got 70 stitches here. I need to join these together so that they're in a loop, and then I can start knitting. To join these in a loop, I want to make sure that these didn't get twisted when I did the stitches. So I'm going to untwist them so that the space in between isn't wrapped around and there's a nice flow between the stitches. If you have a little bit of twisting, you just rotate your knitting needle until that twisting has come undone. So right there, and then bring these around so that I like to start so that the flat side is facing out. So this side here, I'll show you on this guy. This side here, this side is more flat, and then this side here mimics the purl stitch and has more bumps. I like to do my knit join so that the knit side, or that flat side, is to the outside on all sides. So I've created a loop or a triangle here to join these two together. You're going to leave the tail end, get that out of your way, and give yourself some excess from your skein of yarn here. I have the skein, I'm pulling from the center of the skein, so it makes it a little bit easier to work with. And now I'm going to join the circle by bringing the yarn to behind, so it's hanging out back there. I'm going to take my 4th knitting needle and we're going to knit this first row. Just knit 1 row around so that we can join the circle and just establish the knitting project. So I've tucked my knitting needle in and back behind this first stitch on the needle on the left. I'm going to take the yarn from the needle on the right, bring it around this new needle and pull it through. And this is how you join your loop. This first stitch joins the loop together, so you end up with now a little triangle. And now I'm going to continue to knit the stitches from this first needle in my triangle onto the new knitting needle that I just incorporated. So you'll be taking an empty knitting needle and transferring the stitches from a knitting needle in your triangle to your empty knitting needle. And I'm just going to knit this first row around to establish my beginning point of knitting this hat. Today's goal is to complete the ribbed cuff of the hat, and we're going to do about 12 rows for this ribbed cuff so that we have enough that we have a nice edge that we can fold up the brim of the hat and have some overlap. So this first row we'll knit all the way around, and then we'll start a knit 1 purl 1 rib that we do for 12 rows around the circle. And when you transition from one of the knitting needles to the next knitting needle, you're going to again transition the empty knitting needle to knitting the next section of the hat, and continue using the tail that you were knitting with from the last knitting needle onto this next needle and continue your stitches. Now we're going to continue knitting in a round doing a knit 1 purl 1. So you'll start by doing knit 1. I'm going to take my knitting needle, go behind, wrap, get this tail out of my way, it needs to fall in front, wrap around behind this knitting needle, create your knit stitch, and then bring the yarn from behind to the front of your knitting needle, and you're going to do a purl stitch. So you're catching the front of that next stitch, yarning over and pulling the stitch back, so you end up with a purl stitch. Then again, rotate the yarn back behind your working knitting needle, create a knit stitch, knit that off, and then bring the yarn forward, create a purl stitch, knit that off. So again, what the knit purl looks like is bring the yarn behind to create a knit stitch. Then you bring the yarn forward in front of the knitting needle to create a purl stitch. And then behind for your knit stitch, in front for your purl stitch. Behind, knit, in front, purl. So you end up with a little bit of ribbing where it's alternating purl, knit, purl, knit. And you'll see this more clearly as we knit more rows in this rib pattern, and you see multiple rows with the pattern. When you go to your next knitting needle, make sure you continue the knit one, purl one pattern. So here I just did a knit stitch on this latch stitch, so I'm going to purl the first stitch on this next knitting needle, purl, and then knit. And continue around. Once you have your first row of ribbing done, you've knitted around all 3 of the needles, and you are back to where you begin. You're going to do the same thing, making sure to repeat the same knit or purl depending on what that previous row. So here, this previous stitch was a knit, so I'm going to knit this stitch. This previous stitch next to it was a purl, so I'll purl this stitch. So if you get confused in your pattern, you can always look at the previous row to show you what that stitch is going to be. I'm going to knit in a knit one, purl one rib until this measures about 4 inches, and then we will be done with the cuff of this hat. So you can see I have my 4 inches of brim. This is the rib, so the knit purl. In between each knit section there's a purl row, and this is the rim or brim of the hat. We will end up folding this up to create a cuff along the bottom edge of the hat like this. So that's why we end up knitting it so long, so that there's enough to fold up. I'm going to end this video here, and we'll pick it up in part 2 next week, where we'll work on the body of your hat. Like this video because it makes my heart happy and it helps support the Textile Indie YouTube channel and what we do here. Subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the bell to get notified when I put out a new video. I really appreciate it when you do that. Or share this with a friend if you know someone who's interested in getting started in knitting. I'd love for them to get a chance to watch this. Until next week, happy making. I'll see you Saturday for a project vlog and next Wednesday for the next part in the series. Until then, happy making. Bye.